Hello. Tonight, we begin with the most fascinating fairy tale. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Three Brothers. There was once a man who had 3 sons, and no other possessions beyond the house in which he lived. Now the father loved his 3 sons equally, so that he could not make up his mind which of them should have the house after his death, because he did not wish to favor anyone more than the others. And he did not want to sell the house, because it had belonged to his family for generations. Otherwise, he could have divided the money equally amongst them. At last, an idea struck him, and he said to his sons, "You must all go out into the world and look about you, and each learn a trade, and then, when you return, whoever can produce the best masterpiece shall have the house." The sons were quite satisfied. The eldest wished to be a blacksmith, the second a barber, and the third a fencing master. They appointed a time when they were to return home, and then they all set out. It so happened that each found a good master, where he learnt all that was necessary for his trade in the best possible way. The blacksmith had to shoe the king's horses, and thought to himself, "Without doubt, the house will be yours." The barber shaved the best men in the kingdom, and he too made sure that the house would be his. The fencing master received many a blow, but he set his teeth and would not allow himself to be troubled by them, for he thought to himself, "If you are afraid of a blow, you will never get the house." When the appointed time had come, the 3 brothers met once more, and they sat down and discussed the best opportunity of showing off their skill. Just then, a hare came running across the field towards them. "Look," said the barber, "here comes something in the nick of time," and seized basin and soap, made a lather whilst the hare was approaching, and then, as it ran at full tilt, shaved its mustaches, without cutting it or injuring a single hair on its body. "I like that very much indeed," said the father. "Unless the others exert themselves to the utmost, the house will be yours." Soon after, they saw a man driving a carriage furiously towards them. "Now, father, you shall see what I can do," said the blacksmith. And he sprang after the carriage, tore off the 4 shoes of the horse as it was going at the top of its speed, and shod it with 4 new ones without checking its pace. "You are a clever fellow," said the father, "and know your trade as well as your brother. I really don't know to which of you I shall give the house." Then the third son said, "Father, let me also show you something." And as it was beginning to rain, he drew his sword and swung it in cross cuts above his head, so that not a drop fell on him, and the rain fell heavier and heavier, till at last it was coming down like a waterspout. But he swung his sword faster and faster, and kept as dry as if he were under cover. When the father saw this, he was astonished, and said, "You have produced the greatest masterpiece. The house is yours." Both the other brothers were quite satisfied, and praised him too. And as they were so fond of each other, they all three remained at home and plied their trades. And as they were so experienced and skillful, they earned a great deal of money. So they lived happily together till they were quite old. And when one was taken ill and died, the two others were so deeply grieved that they were also taken ill and died too. And so, because they had all been so clever and so fond of each other, they were all laid in one grave. The Snow Queen. There was once a dreadfully wicked hobgoblin. One day, he was in capital spirits because he had made a looking glass which reflected everything that was good and beautiful in such a way that it dwindled almost to nothing. But anything that was bad and ugly stood out very clearly and looked much worse. The most beautiful landscapes looked like boiled spinach, and the best people looked repulsive or seemed to stand on their heads with no bodies. Their faces were so changed that they could not be recognized. And if anyone had a freckle, you might be sure it would be spread over the nose and mouth. "That was the best part of it," said the hobgoblin. But one day, the looking-glass was dropped, and it broke into 1,000,000,000,000 and more pieces. And now came the greatest misfortune of all, for each of the pieces was hardly as large as a grain of sand, and they flew about all over the world. And if anyone had a bit in his eye there, it stayed, and then he would see everything awry, or else could only see the bad sides of a case. For every tiny splinter of the glass possessed the same power that the whole glass had. Some people got a splinter in their hearts, and that was dreadful, for then it began to turn into a lump of ice. The hobgoblin laughed till his sides ached, but still the tiny bits of glass flew about. And now we will hear all about it. In a large town where there were so many people and houses that there was not room enough for everybody to have gardens, lived two poor children. They were not brother and sister, but they loved each other just as much as if they were. Their parents lived opposite one another in two attics, and out on the leads They had put 2 boxes filled with flowers. There were sweet peas in it, and 2 rose trees, which grow beautifully. And in summer, the 2 children were allowed to take their little chairs and sit out under the roses. Then they had splendid games. In the winter, they could not do this, but then they put hot pennies against the frozen window panes and made round holes to look at each other through. His name was Kay, and hers was Gerda. Outside, it was snowing fast. "Those are the white bees swarming," said the old grandmother. "Have they also a queen bee?" asked the little boy, for he knew that the real bees have one. "To be sure," said the grandmother. "She flies wherever they swarm the thickest. She is larger than any of them, and never stays upon the earth, but flies again up into the black clouds. Often at midnight she flies through the streets and peeps in at all the windows, and then they freeze in such pretty patterns and look like flowers." "Yes, we have seen that," said both children. They knew that it was true. "Can the Snow Queen come in here?" asked the little girl. "Just let her," cried the boy. "I would put her on the stove and melt her." But the grandmother stroked his hair and told some more stories. In the evening, when little Kay was going to bed, he jumped on the chair by the window and looked through the little hole. A few snowflakes were falling outside, and one of the largest, lay on the edge of one of the window boxes. The snowflake grew larger and larger, till it took the form of a maiden, dressed in finest white gauze. She was so beautiful and dainty, but all of ice, hard, bright ice. Still, she was alive. Her eyes glittered like 2 clear stars, but there was no rest or peace in them. She nodded at the window and beckoned with her hand. The little boy was frightened and sprang down from the chair. It seemed as if a great white bird had flown past the window. The next day, there was a harder frost than before. Then came the spring, then the summer, when the roses grew and smelt more beautifully than ever. Kay and Gerda were looking at one of their picture books. The clock in the great church tower had just struck 5, when Kay exclaimed, "Oh, something has stung my heart, and I've got something in my eye." The little girl threw her arms round his neck. He winked hard with both his eyes. No, she could see nothing in them. "I think it is gone now," said he. But it had not gone. It was one of the tiny splinters of the glass of the magic mirror which we have heard about, that turned everything great and good reflected in it, small and ugly. And poor Kay had also a splinter in his heart, and it began to change into a lump of ice. It did not hurt him at all, but the splinter was there all the same. "Why are you crying?" he asked. "It makes you look so ugly." There's nothing the matter with me. Just look. That rose is all slug-eaten, and this one is stunted. What ugly roses they are." And he began to pull them to pieces. "Kay, what are you doing?" cried the little girl. And when he saw how frightened she was, he pulled off another rose and ran in at his window, away from dear little Gerda. When she came later on with the picture book, he said that it was only fit for babies. And when his grandmother told them stories, he was always interrupting with, "But," and then he would get behind her and put on her spectacles and speak just as she did. This he did very well, and everybody laughed. Very soon, he could imitate the way all the people in the street walked and talked. His games were now quite different. On a winter's day, he would take a burning glass and hold it out on his blue coat and let the snowflakes fall on it. "Look in the glass, Gerda. Just see how regular they are. They are much more interesting than real flowers. Each is perfect. They are all made according to rule. If only they did not melt." One morning, Kay came out with his warm gloves on, and his little sledge hung over his shoulder. He shouted to Gerda, "I am going to the marketplace to play with the other boys." And away he went. In the marketplace, the boldest boys used often to fasten their sledges to the carts of the farmers, and then they got a good ride. When they were in the middle of their games, there drove into the square a large sledge, all white, and in it sat a figure dressed in a rough white fur pelisse with a white fur cap on. The sledge drove twice round the square, and Kay fastened his little sledge behind it and drove off. It went quicker and quicker into the next street. The driver turned round and nodded to Kay in a friendly way, as if they had known each other before. Every time that Kay tried to unfasten his sledge, the driver nodded again. And Kay sat still once more. Then they drove out of the town, and the snow began to fall so thickly that the little boy could not see his hand before him. And on they went. He quickly unfastened the cord to get loose from the big sledge, but it was of no use. His little sledge hung on fast, and it went on like the wind. Then he cried out, but nobody heard him. He was dreadfully frightened. The snowflakes grew larger and larger till they looked like great white birds. All at once they flew aside. The large sledge stood still, and the figure who was driving stood up. The fur cloak and cap were all of snow. It was a lady, tall and slim, and glittering. It was the Snow Queen. "We have come at a good rate," she said. "But you are almost frozen. Creep in under my cloak." And she set him close to her in the sledge and drew the cloak over him. He felt as though he were sinking into a snowdrift. "Are you cold now?" she asked, and kissed his forehead. The kiss was cold as ice and reached down to his heart, which was already half a lump of ice. "My sledge? Don't forget my sledge." He thought of that first, and it was fastened to one of the great white birds who flew behind with the sledge on its back. The Snow Queen kissed Kay again, and then he forgot all about little Gerda, his grandmother, and everybody at home. "Now I must not kiss you any more," she said, "or else I should kiss you to death." Then away they flew over forests and lakes, over sea and land. Round them whistled the cold wind, the wolves howled, and the snow hissed. Over them flew the black, shrieking crows. But high up, the moon shone large and bright. And thus Kay passed the long winter night. In the day, he slept at the Snow Queen's feet. But what happened to little Gerda when Kay did not come back? What had become of him? Nobody knew. The other boys told how they had seen him fasten his sledge onto a large one, which had driven out of the town gate. Gerda cried a great deal. The winter was long and dark to her. Then the spring came with warm sunshine. "I will go and look for Kay," said Gerda. So she went down to the river and got into a little boat that was there. Presently, the stream began to carry it away. "Perhaps the river will take me to Kay," thought Gerda. She glided down, past trees and fields, till she came to a large cherry garden, in which stood a little house with strange red and blue windows and a straw roof. Before the door stood 2 wooden soldiers who were shouldering arms. Gerda called to them, but they naturally did not answer. The river carried the boat onto the land. Gerda called out still louder, and there came out of the house a very old woman. She leant upon a crutch, and she wore a large sun hat, which was painted with the most beautiful flowers. "You poor little girl," said the old woman. And then she stepped into the water, brought the boat in close with her crutch, and lifted little Gerda out. "And now come and tell me who you are, and how you came here," she said. Then Gerda told her everything, and asked her if she had seen Kay. But she said he had not passed that way yet, but he would soon come. She told Gerda not to be sad, and that she should stay with her and take of the cherry trees and flowers, which were better than any picture book, as they could each tell a story. She then took Gerda's hand and led her into the little house and shut the door. The windows were very high, and the panes were red, blue, and yellow, so that the light came through in curious colors. On the table were the most delicious cherries, and the old woman let Gerda eat as many as she liked, while she combed her hair with a gold comb as she ate. The beautiful sunny hair rippled and shone round the dear little face, which was so soft and sweet. I have always longed to have a dear little girl just like you, and you shall see how happy we will be together. And as she combed Gerda's hair, Gerda thought less and less about Kay, for the old woman was a witch, but not a wicked witch, for she only enchanted now and then to amuse herself, and she did want to keep little Gerda very much. So she went into the garden and waved her stick over all the rose bushes and blossoms and all. They sank down into the black earth, and no one could see where they had been. The old woman was afraid that if Gerda saw the roses, she would begin to think about her own, and then would remember Kay and run away. Then she led Gerda out into the garden. How glorious it was, and what lovely scents filled the air. All the flowers you can think of blossomed there all the year round. Gerda jumped for joy and played there till the sun set behind the tall cherry trees. And then she slept in a beautiful bed with red silk pillows filled with violets. And she slept soundly and dreamed as a queen does on her wedding day. The next day, she played again with the flowers in the warm sunshine, and so many days passed by. Gerda knew every flower, but although there were so many, it seemed to her as if one were not there, though she could not remember which. She was looking one day at the old woman's sun hat, which had HTE painted flowers on it, and there she saw a rose. The witch had forgotten to make that vanish when she had made the other roses disappear under the earth. It was so difficult to think of everything. "Why, there are no roses here," cried Gerda, and she hunted amongst all the flowers, but not one was to be found. Then she sat down and cried, but her tears fell just on the spot where a rose bush had sunk. And when her warm tears watered the earth, the bush came up in full bloom, just as it had been before. Gerda kissed the roses and thought of the lovely roses at home, and with them came the thought of little Kay. "Oh, what have I been doing?" said the little girl. "I wanted to look for Kay." She ran to the end of the garden. The gate was shut, but she pushed against the rusty lock so that it came open. She ran out with her little bare feet. No one came after her. At last she could not run any longer, and she sat down on a large stone. When she looked round, she saw that the summer was over. It was late autumn. It had not changed in the beautiful garden. Where were sunshine and flowers all the year round? "Oh dear, how late I have made myself," said Gerda. "It's autumn already. I cannot rest." And she sprang up to run on. Oh, how tired and sore her little feet grew. And it became colder and colder. She had to rest again. And there on the snow in front of her was a large crow. It had been looking at her for some time, and it nodded its head and said, "Caw, caw, good day." Then it asked the little girl why she was alone in the world. She told the crow her story and asked if he had seen Kay. The crow nodded very thoughtfully and said, "It might be. It might be." "What? Do you think you have?" cried the little girl, and she almost squeezed the crow to death as she kissed him. "Gently, gently," said the crow. I think it might be little Kay, but now he has forgotten you for the princess." "Does he live with a princess?" asked Gerda. "Yes, listen," said the crow. Then he told her all he knew. "In the kingdom in which we are now sitting lives a princess who is dreadfully clever. She has read all the newspapers in the world and has forgotten them again. She is as clever as that. The other day, she came to the throne, and that is not so pleasant as people think. Then she began to say, 'Why should I not marry?' But she wanted a husband who could answer when he was spoken to, not one who would stand up stiffly and look respectable. That would be too dull. When she told all the court ladies, they were delighted. 'You can believe every word I say,' said the crow. 'I have a tame sweetheart in the palace, and she tells me everything.' Of course, his sweetheart was a crow. The newspapers came out next morning with a border of hearts round it, and the princess's monogram on it. And inside, you could read that every good-looking young man might come into the palace and speak to the princess, and whoever should speak loud enough to be heard would be well fed and looked after. And the one who spoke best should become the princess's husband. 'Indeed,' said the crow, 'you can quite believe me. It is as true as that I am sitting here.' Young men came in streams, and there was such a crowding and a mishkechoicing together. But nothing came of it on the first nor on the second day. They could all speak quite well when they were in the street. But as soon as they came inside the palace door and saw the guards in silver, and upstairs the footmen in gold, and the great hall all lighted up, then their wits left them. And when they stood in front of the throne where the princess was sitting, then they could not think of anything to say except to repeat the last word she had spoken. And she did not much care to hear that again. It seemed as if they were walking in their sleep until they came out into the street again, when they could speak once more. There was a row stretching from the gate of the town up to the castle. They were hungry and thirsty, but in the palace they did not even get a glass of water. A few of the cleverest had brought some slices of bread and butter with them, but they did not share them with their neighbor, for they thought, if he looks hungry, the princess will not take him. "But what about Kay?" asked Gerda. "When did he come? Was he in the crowd?" "Wait a bit. We are coming to him." On the third day, a little figure came without horse or carriage and walked jauntily up to the palace. His eyes shone as yours do. He had lovely curling hair, but quite poor clothes. "That was Kay!" cried Gerda with delight. "Oh, then I have found him." And she clapped her hands. "He had a little bundle on his back," said the crow. "No, it must have been his skates, for he went away with his skates." "Very likely," said the crow. "I did not see for certain, but I know this from my sweetheart, that when he came to the palace door and saw the royal guards in silver, and on the stairs the footmen in gold, he was not the least bit put out. He nodded to them, saying, 'It must be rather dull standing on the stairs. I would rather go inside.' The halls blazed with lights. Counselors and ambassadors were walking about in noiseless shoes, carrying gold dishes. It was enough to make one nervous. His boots creaked dreadfully loud, but he was not frightened. "That must be Kay," said Gerda. "I know he had new boots on. I have heard them creaking in his grandmother's room." "They did creak, certainly," said the crow. "And not one bit afraid, up he went to the princess, who was sitting on a large pearl as round as a spinning wheel. All the ladies in waiting were standing round, each with their attendants, and the lords in waiting with their attendants. The nearer they stood to the door, the prouder they were. "It must have been dreadful," said little Gerda. "And Kay did win the princess? I heard from my tame sweetheart that he was merry and quick-witted. He had not come to woo, he said, but to listen to the princess's wisdom. And the end of it was that they fell in love with each other." "Oh yes, that was Kay," said Gerda. "He was so clever. He could do sums with fractions. Oh, do lead me to the palace." "That's easily said," answered the crow. "But how are we to manage that? I must talk it over with my tame sweetheart. She may be able to advise us, for I must tell you that a little girl like you could never get permission to enter it." "Yes, I will get it," said Gerda. "When Kay hears that I am there, he will come out at once and fetch me." "Wait for me by the railings," said the crow, and he nodded his head and flew away. It was late in the evening when he came back. "Caw, caw," he said, "I am to give you her love, and here is a little roll for you." She took it out of the kitchen. "There's plenty there, and you must be hungry. You cannot come into the palace. The guards in silver and the footmen in gold would not allow it. But don't cry. You shall get in all right. My sweetheart knows a little back stairs which leads to the sleeping room, and she knows where to find the key." They went into the garden, and when the lights in the palace were put out one after the other, the crow led Gerda to a back door. Oh, how Gerda's heart beat with anxiety and longing. It seemed as if she were going to do something wrong, but she only wanted to know if it were little Kay. Yes, it must be he. She remembered so well his clever eyes, his curly hair. She could see him smiling as he did when they were at home under the rose trees. He would be so pleased to see her and to hear how they all were at home. Now they were on the stairs. A little lamp was burning, and on the landing stood the tame crow. She put her head on one side and looked at Gerda, who bowed as her grandmother had taught her. "My betrothed has told me many nice things about you, my dear young lady," she said. "Will you take the lamp while I go in front? We go this way so as to meet no one." Through beautiful rooms, they came to the sleeping room. In the middle of it, hung on a thick rod of gold, were two beds, shaped like lilies, one all white, in which lay the princess, and the other red, in which Gerda hoped to find Kay. She pushed aside the curtain and saw a brown neck. Oh, it was Kay. She called his name out loud, holding the lamp towards him. He woke up, turned his head, and it was not Kay. It was only his neck that was like Kay's, but he was young and handsome. The princess sat up in her lily bed and asked who was there. Then Gerda cried and told her story and all that the crows had done. "You poor child," said the prince and princess, and they praised the crows and said that they were not angry with them, but that they must not do it again. Now they should have a reward. "Would you like to fly away free?" said the princess. "Or will you have a permanent place as court crows with what you can get in the kitchen?" And both crows bowed and asked for a permanent appointment, for they thought of their old age. And they put Gerda to bed, and she folded her hands, thinking as she fell asleep, "How good people and animals are to me." The next day, she was dressed from head to foot in silk and satin. They wanted her to stay on in the palace, but she begged for a little carriage and a horse and a pair of shoes so that she might go out again into the world to look for Kay. They gave her a muff, as well as some shoes. She was warmly dressed, and when she was ready, there in front of the door stood a coach of pure gold, with a coachman, footmen, and postilions with gold crowns on. The prince and princess helped her into the carriage and wished her good luck. The wild crow, who was now married, drove with her for the first 3 miles. The other crow could not come because she had a bad headache. "Goodbye, goodbye," called the prince and princess. And little Gerda cried, and the crow cried. When he said goodbye, he flew on to a tree and waved with his black wings as long as the carriage, which shone like the sun, was in sight. They came at last to a dark wood, but the coach lit it up like a torch. When the robbers saw it, they rushed out, exclaiming, "Gold! Gold!" They seized the horses, killed the coachman, footmen, and postilions, and dragged Gerda out of the carriage. "She is plump and tender. I will eat her," said the old robber queen, and she drew her long knife, which glittered horribly. "You shall not kill her," cried her little daughter. "She shall play with me. She shall give me her muff and her beautiful dress, and she shall sleep in my bed." The little robber girl was as big as Gerda, but was stronger, broader, with dark hair and black eyes. She threw her arms round Gerda and said, "They shall not kill you so long as you are not naughty." "Aren't you a princess?" "No," said Gerda, and she told all that had happened to her, and how dearly she loved little Kay. The robber girl looked at her very seriously and nodded her head, saying, "They shall not kill you, even if you are naughty, for then I will kill you myself." And she dried Gerda's eyes and stuck both her hands in the beautiful warm muff. The little robber girl took Gerda to a corner of the robbers' camp, where she slept. All round were more than 100 wood pigeons, which seemed to be asleep. But they moved a little when the 2 girls came up. There was also, nearby, a reindeer, which the robber girl teased by tickling it with her long, sharp knife. Gerda lay awake for some time. "Coo, coo," said the wood pigeons. "We have seen little Kay." A white bird carried his sledge. He was sitting in the Snow Queen's carriage, which drove over the forest when our little ones were in the nest. She breathed on them, and all except we 2 died. "Coo, coo." "What are you saying over there?" cried Gerda. "Where was the Snow Queen going to? Do you know at all?" "She was probably traveling to Lapland, where there is always ice and snow. Ask the reindeer." "There is capital ice and snow there," said the reindeer. "One can jump about there in the great sparkling valleys. There the Snow Queen has her summer palace, but her best palace is up by the North Pole, on the island called Spitzbergen. "Oh, Kay, my little Kay," sobbed Gerda. "You must lie still," said the little robber girl, "or else I shall stick my knife into you." In the morning, Gerda told her all that the wood pigeons had said. She nodded. "Do you know where Lapland is?" she asked the reindeer. "Who should know better than I?" said the beast, and his eyes sparkled. "I was born and bred there on the snowfields." "Listen," said the robber girl to Gerda. "You see that all the robbers have gone. Only my mother is left, and she will fall asleep in the afternoon. Then I will do something for you." When her mother had fallen asleep, the robber girl went up to the reindeer and said, "I am going to set you free so that you can run to Lapland. But you must go quickly and carry this little girl to the Snow Queen's palace, where her playfellow is. You must have heard all that she told about it, for she spoke loud enough." The reindeer sprang high for joy. The robber girl lifted little Gerda up and had the foresight to tie her on firmly, and even gave her a little pillow for a saddle. "You must have your fur boots," she said, "for it will be cold. But I shall keep your muff, for it is so cozy. But so that you may not freeze, here are my mother's great fur gloves. They will come up to your elbows. Creep into them." And Gerda cried for joy. "Don't make such faces," said the little robber girl. "You must look very happy. And here are 2 loaves and a sausage. Now you won't be hungry." They were tied to the reindeer. The little robber girl opened the door, made all the big dogs come away, cut through the halter with her sharp knife, and said to the reindeer, "Run now, but take great care of the little girl." And Gerda stretched out her hands with the large fur gloves towards the little robber girl and said, "Goodbye." Then the reindeer flew over the ground, through the great forest, as fast as he could. The wolves howled, the ravens screamed, the sky seemed on fire. "Those are my dear old northern lights," said the reindeer. "See how they shine." And then he ran faster still, day and night. The loaves were eaten, and the sausage also, and then they came to Lapland. They stopped by a wretched little house. The roof almost touched the ground, and the door was so low that you had to creep in and out. There was no one in the house except an old Lapland woman who was cooking fish over an oil lamp. The reindeer told Gerda's whole history, but first he told his own, for that seemed to him much more important. And Gerda was so cold that she could not speak. "Ah, you poor creatures," said the Lapland woman. "You have still further to go. You must go over 100 miles into Finland, for there the Snow Queen lives. And every night She burns Bengal lights. I will write some words on a dried stockfish, for I have no paper. And you must give it to the Finland woman, for she can give you better advice than I can." And when Gerda was warmed and had had something to eat and drink, the Lapland woman wrote on a dried stockfish and begged Gerda to take care of it, tied Gerda securely on the reindeer's back, and away they went again. The whole night was ablaze with northern lights, and then they came to Finland and knocked at the Finland woman's chimney, for door she had none. Inside it was so hot that the Finland woman wore very few clothes. She loosened Gerda's clothes and drew off her fur gloves and boots. She laid a piece of ice on the reindeer's head, and then read what was written on the stockfish. She read it over 3 times till she knew it by heart, and then put the fish in the saucepan, for she never wasted anything. Then the reindeer told his story, and afterwards little Gerda's and the Finland woman blinked her eyes, but said nothing. "You are very clever," said the reindeer. "I know. Cannot you give the little girl a drink, so that she may have the strength of 12 men and overcome the Snow Queen?" "The strength of 12 men," said the Finland woman. "That would not help much. Little Kay is with the Snow Queen, and he likes everything there very much, and thinks it the best place in the world. But that is because he has a splinter of glass in his heart, and a bit in his eye. If these do not come out, he will never be free, and the Snow Queen will keep her power over him." "But cannot you give little Gerda something so that she can have power over her?" "I can give her no greater power than she has already. Don't you see how great it is? Don't you see how much men and beasts must help her when she wanders into the wide world with her bare feet? She is powerful already, because she is a dear little innocent child. If she cannot by herself conquer the Snow Queen and take away the glass splinters from little Kay, we cannot help her. The Snow Queen's garden begins 2 miles from here. You can carry the little maiden so far. Put her down by the large bush with red berries growing in the snow. Then you must come back here as fast as you can." Then the Finland woman lifted little Gerda on the reindeer, and away he sped. "Oh, I have left my gloves and boots behind," cried Gerda. She missed them in the piercing cold, but the reindeer did not dare to stop. On he ran till he came to the bush with red berries. Then he set Gerda down and kissed her mouth, and great big tears ran down his cheeks. And then he ran back. There stood poor Gerda, without shoes or gloves, in the middle of the bitter cold of Finland. She ran on as fast as she could. A regiment of gigantic snowflakes came against her, but they melted when they touched her, and she went on with fresh courage. And now we must see what Kay was doing. He was not thinking of Gerda, and never dreamt that she was standing outside the palace. The walls of the palace were built of driven snow, and the doors and windows of piercing winds. There were more than 100 halls in it, all of frozen snow. The largest was several miles long. The bright northern lights lit them up, and very large and empty and cold and glittering they were. In the middle of the great hall was a frozen lake which had cracked in 1,000 pieces. Each piece was exactly like the other. Here the Snow Queen used to sit when she was at home. Little Kay was almost blue and black with cold, but he did not feel it, for she had kissed away his feelings, and his heart was a lump of ice. He was pulling about some sharp, flat pieces of ice and trying to fit one into the other. He thought each was most beautiful, but that was because of the splinter of glass in his eye. He fitted them into a great many shapes, but he wanted to make them spell the word love. The Snow Queen had said, "If you can spell out that word, you shalt be your own master. I will give you the whole world and a new pair of skates." But he could not do it. "Now I must fly to warmer countries," said the Snow Queen. "I must go and powder my black kettles." This was what she called Mount Etna and Mount Vesuvius. It does the lemons and grapes good. And off she flew, and Kay sat alone in the great hall, trying to do his puzzle. He sat so still that you would have thought he was frozen. Then it happened that little Gerda stepped into the hall. The biting cold winds became quiet, as if they had fallen asleep when she appeared in the great, empty, freezing hall. She caught sight of Kay. She recognized him and ran and put her arms round his neck, crying, "Kay, dear little Kay, I have found you at last." But he sat quite still and cold. Then Gerda wept hot tears which fell on his neck and thawed his heart and swept away the bit of the looking glass. He looked at her, and then he burst into tears. He cried so much that the glass splinter swam out of his eye. Then he knew her and cried out, "Gerda, dear little Gerda, where have you been so long? And where have I been?" And he looked round him. "How cold it is here! How wide and empty!" And he threw himself on Gerda, and she laughed and wept for joy. It was such a happy time that the pieces of ice even danced round them for joy. And when they were tired and lay down again, they formed themselves into the letters that the Snow Queen had said he must spell in order to become his own master and have the whole world and a new pair of skates. And Gerda kissed his cheeks, and they grew rosy. She kissed his eyes, and they sparkled like hers. She kissed his hands and feet, and he became warm and glowing. The Snow Queen might come home now. His release, the word love, stood written in sparkling ice. They took each other's hands and wandered out of the great palace. They talked about the grandmother and the roses on the leads. Wherever they came, the winds hushed and the sun came out. When they reached the bush with red berries, there stood the reindeer waiting for them. He carried Kay and Gerda first to the Finland woman, who warmed them in her hot room and gave them advice for their journey home. Then they went to the Lapland woman, who gave them new clothes and mended their sleigh. The reindeer ran with them until they came to the green fields, fresh with the spring green. Here he said goodbye. They came to the forest, which was bursting into bud, and out of it came a splendid horse, which Gerda knew. It was the one which had drawn the gold coach, ridden by a young girl with a red cap on and pistols in her belt. It was the little robber girl who was tired of being at home and wanted to go out into the world. She and Gerda knew each other at once. "You are a nice fellow," she said to Kay. "I should like to know if you deserve to be run all over the world." But Gerda patted her cheeks and asked after the prince and princess. "They are traveling about," said the robber girl. "And the crow?" asked Gerda. "Oh, the crow is dead," answered the robber girl. "His tame sweetheart is a widow and hops about with a bit of black crepe round her leg. She makes a great fuss. But that's all nonsense. But tell me what happened to you and how you caught him." And Kay and Gerda told her all. "Dear, dear," said the robber girl, shook both their hands, and promised that if she came to their town, she would come and see them. Then she rode on, but Gerda and Kay went home hand in hand. There they found the grandmother and everything just as it had been. But when they went through the doorway, they found they were grown up. There were the roses on the leads. It was summer, warm, glorious summer. The Fir-Tree. There was once a pretty little fir tree in a wood. It was in a capital position, for it could get sun, and there was enough air, and all around grew many tall companions, both pines and firs. It did not heed the warm sun and the fresh air, or notice the little peasant children who ran about chattering when they came out to gather wild strawberries and raspberries. Often they found a whole basketful and strung strawberries on a straw. They would sit down by the little fir tree and say, what a pretty little one this is." The tree did not like that at all. By the next year, it had grown a whole ring taller, and the year after that, another ring more, for you can always tell a fir tree's age from its rings. "Oh, if I were only a great tree like the others," sighed the little fir tree. "Then I could stretch out my branches far and wide and look out into the great world. The birds would build their nests in my branches, and when the wind blew, I would bow to it politely, just like the others." It took no pleasure in the sunshine, nor in the birds, nor in the rose-colored clouds that sailed over it at dawn and at sunset. Then the winter came, and the snow lay white and sparkling all around, and a hare would come and spring right over the little fir tree, which annoyed it very much. But when 2 more winters had passed, the fir tree was so tall that the hare had to run round it. Ah, to grow and grow and become great and old, that is the only pleasure in life, thought the tree. In the autumn, the woodcutters used to come and hew some of the tallest trees. This happened every year, and the young fir tree would shiver as the magnificent trees fell crashing and crackling to the ground, their branches hewn off, and the great trunks left bare, so that they were almost unrecognizable. But then they were laid on wagons and dragged out of the wood by horses. Where are they going? What will happen to them? In spring, when the swallows and storks came, the fir tree asked them, "Do you know where they were taken? Have you met them?" The swallows knew nothing of them, but the stork nodded his head thoughtfully, saying, "I think I know. I met many new ships as I flew from Egypt. There were splendid masts on the ships. I'll wager those were they. They had the scent of fir trees. Ah, those are grand, grand. Oh, if I were only big enough to sail away over the sea too. What sort of thing is the sea? What does it look like? Oh, it would take much too long to tell you all that," said the stork. And off he went. "Rejoice in your youth," said the sunbeams. "Rejoice in the sweet growing time, in the young life within you." And the wind kissed it, and the dew wept tears over it. But the fir tree did not understand. Towards Christmas time, quite little trees were cut down, some not as big as the young fir tree, or just the same age. And now it had no peace or rest for longing to be away. These little trees, which were chosen for their beauty, kept all their branches. They were put in carts and drawn out of the wood by horses. "Whither are those going?" asked the fir tree. "They are no bigger than I, and one there was much smaller even. Why do they keep their branches? Where are they taken to?" "We know," We know, twittered the sparrows. Down there in the city, we have peeped in at the windows. We know where they go. They attain to the greatest splendor and magnificence you can imagine. We have looked in at the windows and seen them planted in the middle of the warm room and adorned with the most beautiful things. Golden apples, sweetmeats, toys, and hundreds of candles. And then? Asked the fir-tree, trembling in every limb with eagerness. And then? What happens then? Oh, we haven't seen anything more than that. That was simply matchless. Am I too destined to the same brilliant career? Wondered the fir-tree excitedly. That is even better than sailing over the sea. I am sick with longing. If it were only Christmas. Now I am tall and grown up, like those which were taken away last year. Ah, if I were only in the cart. If I were only in the warm room, with all the splendor and magnificence. And then? Then comes something better, something still more beautiful. Else, why should they dress us up? There must be something greater, something grander to come. But what? Oh, I am pining away. I really don't know what's the matter with me. Rejoice in us, said the air and sunshine. Rejoice in your fresh youth, in the free air. But it took no notice, and just grew and grew. There it stood, fresh and green, in winter and summer, and all who saw it said, "What a beautiful tree!" And at Christmas time, it was the first to be cut down. The axe went deep into the pith. The tree fell to the ground with a groan. It felt bruised and faint. It could not think of happiness. It was sad at leaving its home, the spot where it had sprung up. It knew, too, that it would never see again its dear old companions, or the little shrubs and flowers, perhaps not even the birds. Altogether, the parting was not pleasant. When the tree came to itself again, it was packed in a yard with other trees, and a man was saying, "This is a splendid one. We shall only want this." Then came 2 footmen in livery and carried the fir-tree to a large and beautiful room. There were pictures hanging on the walls, and near the Dutch stove stood great Chinese vases with lions on their lids. There were armchairs, silk-covered sofas, big tables, laden with picture books and toys, worth hundreds of pounds, at least, so the children said. The fir-tree was placed in a great tub filled with sand, but no one could see that it was a tub, for it was all hung with greenery and stood on a gay carpet. How the tree trembled! What was coming now? On its branches, they hung little nets cut out of colored paper, each full of sugar plums. Gilt apples and nuts hung down as if they were growing. Over 100 red, blue, and white tapers were fastened among the branches. Dolls as lifelike as human beings. The fir-tree had never seen any before, were suspended among the green, and right up at the top was fixed a gold tinsel star. It was gorgeous, quite unusually gorgeous. "Tonight," they all said, "tonight it will be lighted." Ah, thought the tree, if it were only evening, then the tapers would soon be lighted. What will happen then? I wonder whether the trees will come from the wood to see me, or if the sparrows will fly against the window panes. Am I to stand here, decked out thus through winter and summer? It was not a bad guess, but the fir-tree had real bark ache from sheer longing, and bark ache in trees is just as bad as headache in human beings. Now the tapers were lighted. What a glitter! What splendor! The tree quivered in all its branches so much that one of the candles caught the green and singed it. "Take care!" cried the young ladies, and they extinguished it. Now the tree did not even dare to quiver. It was really terrible. It was so afraid of losing any of its ornaments, and it was quite bewildered by all the radiance. And then the folding doors were opened, and a crowd of children rushed in, as though they wanted to knock down the whole tree, whilst the older people followed soberly. The children stood quite silent, but only for a moment, and then they shouted again, and danced round the tree, and snatched off one present after another. "What are they doing?" thought the tree. "What is going to happen?" And the tapers burnt low on the branches, and were put out one by one, and then the children were given permission to plunder the tree. They rushed at it, so that all its boughs creaked. If it had not been fastened by the gold star at the top to the ceiling, it would have been overthrown. The children danced about with their splendid toys, and no one looked at the tree except the old nurse, who came and peeped amongst the boughs just to see if a fig or an apple had been forgotten. "A story! A story!" cried the children, and dragged a little stout man to the tree. He sat down beneath it, saying, "Here we are in the greenwood, and the tree will be delighted to listen. But I am only going to tell one story. Shall it be Henny Penny or Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and yet gained great honor and married a princess?" "Henny Penny," cried some. "Humpty Dumpty," cried others. There was a perfect babel of voices. Only the fir-tree kept silent and thought, "Am I not to be in it? Am I to have nothing to do with it?" But it had already been in it, and played out its part. And the man told them about Humpty Dumpty, who fell downstairs and married a princess. The children clapped their hands and cried, "Another, another!" They wanted the story of Henny Penny also, but they only got Humpty Dumpty. The fir-tree stood quite astonished and thoughtful. The birds in the wood had never related anything like that. Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs and yet married a princess. Yes, that is the way of the world, thought the tree, and was sure it must be true, because such a nice man had told the story. Well, who knows? Perhaps I shall fall downstairs and marry a princess. And it rejoiced to think that next day it would be decked out again with candles, toys, glittering ornaments, and fruits. Tomorrow I shall quiver again with excitement. I shall enjoy to the full all my splendor. Tomorrow I shall hear Humpty Dumpty again, and perhaps Henny Penny too. And the tree stood silent and lost in thought all through the night. Next morning, the servants came in. Now, the dressing up will begin again, thought the tree. But they dragged it out of the room and up the stairs to the lumber room and put it in a dark corner where no ray of light could penetrate. What does this mean? Thought the tree. What am I to do here? What is there for me to hear? And it leant against the wall and thought and thought. And there was time enough for that, for days and nights went by, and no one came. At last, when someone did come, it was only to put some great boxes into the corner. Now the tree was quite covered. It seemed as if it had been quite forgotten. Now it is winter outdoors, thought the fir-tree. The ground is hard and covered with snow. They can't plant me yet, and that is why I am staying here under cover till the spring comes. How thoughtful they are. Only I wish it were not so terribly dark and lonely here. Not even a little hare. It was so nice out in the wood when the snow lay all around and the hare leapt past me. Yes, even when he leapt over me. But I didn't like it then. It's so dreadfully lonely up here. Squeak, squeak, said a little mouse, stealing out, followed by a second. They sniffed at the fir-tree, and then crept between its boughs. It's frightfully cold, said the little mice. How nice it is to be here. Don't you think so too, you old fir-tree? I'm not at all old, said the tree. There are many much older than I am. Where do you come from? Asked the mice. And what do you know? They were extremely inquisitive. Do tell us about the most beautiful place in the world. Is that where you come from? Have you been in the storeroom, where cheeses lie on the shelves, and hams hang from the ceiling, where one dances on tallow candles, and where one goes in thin and comes out sour? I know nothing about that, said the tree, but I know the wood, where the sun shines, and the birds sing. And then it told them all about its young days, and the little mice had never heard anything like that before, and they listened with all their ears and said, "Oh, how much you have seen! how lucky you have been." "I?" said the fir-tree, and then it thought over what it had told them. Yes, on the whole, those were very happy times. But then it went on to tell them about Christmas Eve, when it had been adorned with sweet meats and tapers. "Oh," said the little mice, "how lucky you have been, you old fir-tree." "I'm not at all old," said the tree. "I only came from the wood this winter. I am only a little backward, perhaps, in my growth." "How beautifully you tell stories," said the little mice. And next evening they came with 4 others who wanted to hear the tree's story. And it told still more, for it remembered everything so clearly and thought, "Those were happy times, but they may come again." Humpty Dumpty fell downstairs, and yet he married a princess. Perhaps I shall also marry a princess. And then it thought of a pretty little birch tree that grew out in the wood, and seemed to the fir-tree a real princess, and a very beautiful one too. "Who is Humpty Dumpty?" asked the little mice. And then the tree told the whole story. It could remember every single word, and the little mice were ready to leap on to the topmost branch out of sheer joy. Next night, many more mice came, and on Sunday, even 2 rats. But they did not care about the story, and that troubled the little mice, for now they thought less of it too. "Is that the only story you know?" asked the rats. "The only one," answered the tree. "I heard that on my happiest evening, but I did not realize then how happy I was." "That's a very poor story. Don't you know one about bacon or tallow candles? A storeroom story?" "No," said the tree. "Then we are much obliged to you," said the rats, and they went back to their friends. At last the little mice went off also, and the tree said, sighing, "Really, it was very pleasant when the lively little mice sat round and listened whilst I told them stories. But now that's over too. But now I will think of the time when I shall be brought out again, to keep up my spirits." But when did that happen? Well, it was one morning when they came to tidy up the lumber room. They threw it really rather roughly on the floor, but a servant dragged it off at once downstairs, where there was daylight once more. "Now life begins again," thought the tree. It felt the fresh air, the first rays of the sun, and there it was, out in the yard. Everything passed so quickly. The tree quite forgot to notice itself. There was so much to look at all around. The yard opened on a garden full of flowers. The roses were so fresh and sweet, hanging over a little trellis. The lime trees were in blossom, and the swallows flew about, saying, "Quire vire vir, my husband has come home." But it was not the fir-tree they meant. "Now I shall live," thought the tree, joyfully, stretching out its branches wide. But, alas, They were all withered and yellow, and it was lying in a corner among weeds and nettles. The golden star was still on its highest bough, and it glittered in the bright sunlight. In the yard, some of the merry children were playing, who had danced so gaily round the tree at Christmas. One of the little ones ran up and tore off the gold star. "Look what was left on the ugly old fir-tree," he cried, and stamped on the boughs so that they cracked under his feet. And the tree looked at all the splendor and freshness of the flowers in the garden, and then looked at itself and wished that it had been left lying in the dark corner of the lumber room. It thought of its fresh youth in the wood, of the merry Christmas Eve, and of the little mice who had listened so happily to the story of Humpty Dumpty. Too late, thought the old tree. If only I had enjoyed myself whilst I could. Now all is over and gone. And a servant came and cut the tree into small pieces. There was quite a bundle of them. They flickered brightly under the great copper in the brewhouse. The tree sighed deeply, and each sigh was like a pistol shot. So the children who were playing there ran up and sat in front of the fire, gazing at it and crying, "Piff, puff, bang." But for each report, which was really a sigh, the tree was thinking of a summer's day in the wood, or of a winter's night out there, when the stars were shining. It thought of Christmas Eve and of Humpty Dumpty, which was the only story it had heard, or could tell. And then the tree had burnt away. The children played on in the garden, and the youngest had the golden star on his breast, which the tree had worn on the happiest evening of its life. And now that was past, and the tree had passed away, and the story, too, all ended and done with. And that's the way with all stories. Here our Danish author ends. This is what people call sentiment, and I hope you enjoy it. Hans, the mermaid's son. In a village there once lived a smith called Basmus, who was in a very poor way. He was still a young man, and a strong, handsome fellow to boot, but he had many little children, and there was little to be earned by his trade. He was, however, a diligent and hard-working man, and when he had no work in the smithy, he was out at sea fishing, or gathering wreckage on the shore. It happened one time that he had gone out to fish in good weather, all alone in a little boat. But he did not come home that day, nor the following one, so that all believed he had perished out at sea. On the third day, however, Basmus came to shore again, and had his boat full of fish, so big and fat that no one had ever seen their like. There was nothing the matter with him, and he complained neither of hunger or thirst. He had got into a fog, he said, and could not find land again. What he did not tell, however, was where he had been all the time. That only came out 6 years later, when people got to know that he had been caught by a mermaid out on the deep sea, and had been her guest during the 3 days that he was missing. From that time forth, he went out no more to fish, nor indeed did he require to do so, for whenever he went down to the shore, it never failed that some wreckage was washed up, and in it all kinds of valuable things. In those days, everyone took what they found and got leave to keep it, so that the smith grew more prosperous day by day. When 7 years had passed since the smith went out to sea, it happened one morning, as he stood in the smithy, mending a plough, that a handsome young lad came in to him and said, "Good day, father. My mother the mermaid sends her greetings, and says that she has had me for 6 years now, and you can keep me for as long." He was a strange enough boy to be 6 years old, for he looked as if he were 18, and was even bigger and stronger than lads commonly are at that age. "Will you have a bite of bread?" said the smith. "Oh, yes," said Hans, for that was his name. The smith then told his wife to cut a piece of bread for him. She did so, and the boy swallowed it at one mouthful and went out again to the smithy to his father. "Have you got all you can eat?" said the smith. "No," said Hans. That was just a little bit. The smith went into the house and took a whole loaf, which he cut into 2 slices and put butter and cheese between them. And this he gave to Hans. In a while, the boy came out to the smithy again. "Well, have you got as much as you can eat?" said the smith. "No, not nearly," said Hans. "I must try to find a better place than this, for I can see that I shall never get my fill here." Hans wished to set off at once, as soon as his father would make a staff for him of such a kind as he wanted. "It must be of iron," said he, "and one that can hold out." The smith brought him an iron rod as thick as an ordinary staff, but Hans took it and twisted it round his finger, so that wouldn't do. Then the smith came dragging one as thick as a wagon pole, but Hans bent it over his knee and broke it like a straw. The smith then had to collect all the iron he had, and Hans held it while his father forged for him a staff, which was heavier than the anvil. When Hans had got this, he said, "Many thanks, father. Now I have got my inheritance." With this, he set off into the country, and the smith was very pleased to be rid of that son before he ate him out of house and home. Hans first arrived at a large estate, and it so happened that the squire himself was standing outside the farmyard. "Where are you going?" said the squire. "I am looking for a place," said Hans, "where they have need of strong fellows, and can give them plenty to eat." "Well," said the squire, "I generally have 24 men at this time of the year, but I have only 12 just now, so I can easily take you on." "Very well," said Hans. "I shall easily do 12 men's work, but then I must also have as much to eat as the 12 would." All this was agreed to, and the squire took Hans into the kitchen and told the servant girls that the new man was to have as much food as the other 12. It was arranged that he should have a pot to himself, and he could then use the ladle to take his food with. It was in the evening that Hans arrived there, so he did nothing more that day than eat his supper. A big pot of buckwheat porridge, which he cleaned to the bottom, and was then so far satisfied that he said he could sleep on that. So he went off to bed. He slept both well and long, and all the rest were up and at their work, while he was still sleeping soundly. The squire was also on foot, for he was curious to see how the new man would behave, who was both to eat and work for 12. But as yet there was no Hans to be seen, and the sun was already high in the heavens, so the squire himself went and called on him. "Get up, Hans," he cried. "You are sleeping too long." Hans woke up and rubbed his eyes. "Yes, that's true," he said. "I must get up and have my breakfast." So he rose and dressed himself and went into the kitchen, where he got his pot of porridge. He swallowed all of this and then asked what work he was to have. He was to thresh that day, said the squire. The other 12 men were already busy at it. There were 12 threshing floors, and the 12 men were at work on 6 of them, 2 on each. Hans must thresh by himself all that was lying upon the other 6 floors. He went out to the barn and got hold of a flail. Then he looked to see how the others did it, and did the same. But at HTE first stroke, he smashed the flail in pieces. There were several flails hanging there, and Hans took the one after the other, but they all went the same way, every one flying in splinters at the first stroke. He then looked round for something else to work with, and found a pair of strong beams lying near. Next, he caught sight of a horsehide nailed up on the barn door. With the beams, he made a flail, using the skin to tie them together. The one beam he used as a handle, and the other to strike with. And now, that was all right. But the barn was too low. There was no room to swing the flail, and the floors were too small. Hans, however, found a remedy for this. He simply lifted the whole roof off the barn and set it down in the field beside. He then emptied down all the corn that he could lay his hands on and threshed away. He went through one lot after another, and it was LL the same to him what he got hold of. So before midday, he had threshed all the squire's grain, his rye and wheat, and barley and oats all mixed through each other. When he was finished with this, he lifted the roof up on the barn again, like setting a lid on a box, and went in and told the squire that the job was done. The squire opened his eyes at this announcement and came out to see if it was really true. It was true, sure enough, but he was scarcely delighted with the mixed grain that he got from all his crops. However, when he saw the flail that Hans had used, and learned how he had made room for himself to swing it, he was so afraid of the strong fellow that he dared not say anything, except that it was a good thing he had got it threshed, but it had still to be cleaned. "What does that mean?" asked Hans. It was explained to him that the corn and the chaff had to be separated. As yet, both were lying in one heap, right up to the roof. Hans began to take up a little and sift it in his hands, but he soon saw that this would never do. He soon thought of a plan, however. He opened both barn doors, and then lay down at one end and blew, so that all the chaff flew out and lay like a sandbank at the other end of the barn, and the grain was as clean as it could be. Then he reported to the squire that that job also was done. The squire said that that was well. There was nothing more for him to do that day. Off went Hans to the kitchen and got as much as he could eat. Then he went and took a midday nap, which lasted till supper time. Meanwhile, the squire was quite miserable and made his moan to his wife, saying that she must help him to find some means to getting rid of this strong fellow, for he durst not give him his leave. She sent for the steward, and it was arranged that next day all the men should go to the forest for firewood, and that they should make a bargain among them, that the one who came home last with his load should be hanged. They thought they could easily manage that it would be Hans who would lose his life, for the others would be early on the road, while Hans would certainly oversleep himself. In the evening, therefore, the men sat and talked together, saying that next morning they must set out early to the forest. And as they had a hard day's work and a long journey before them, they would, for their amusement, make a compact that whichever of them came home last with his load should lose his life on the gallows. So Hans had no objections to make. Long before the sun was up next morning, all the 12 men were on foot. They took all the best horses and carts and drove off to the forest. Hans, however, lay and slept on, and the squire said, "Just let him lie." At last, Hans thought it was time to have his breakfast, so he got up and put on his clothes. He took plenty of time to his breakfast, and then went out to get his horse and cart ready. The others had taken everything that was any good, so that he had a difficulty in scraping together 4 wheels of different sizes and fixing them to an old cart, and he could find no other horses than a pair of old hacks. He did not know where it lay, but he followed the track of the other carts, and in that way came to it all right. On coming to the gate leading into the forest, he was unfortunate enough to break it in pieces, so he took a huge stone that was lying on the field, 7 ells long and 7 ells broad, and set this in the gap. Then he went on and joined the others. These laughed at him heartily, for they had labored as hard as they could since daybreak, and had helped each other to fell trees and put them on the carts, so that all of these were now loaded except one. Hans got hold of a woodman's axe and proceeded to fell a tree, but he destroyed the edge and broke the shaft at the first blow. He therefore laid down the axe, put his arms round the tree, and pulled it up by the roots. This he threw upon his cart, and then another and another. And thus he went on, while all the others forgot their work, and stood with open mouths, gazing at this strange woodcraft. All at once, they began to hurry. The last cart was loaded, and they whipped up their horses, so as to be the first to arrive home. When Hans had finished his work, he again put his old hacks into the cart, but they could not move it from the spot. He was annoyed at this, and took them out again, twisted a rope round the cart, and all the trees, lifted the whole affair on his back, and set off home, leading the horses behind him by the rein. When he reached the gate, he found the whole row of carts standing there, unable to get any further for the stone which lay in the gap. "What?" said Hans. "Can 12 men not move that stone?" With that, he lifted it and threw it out of Hutched way, and went on with his burden on his back, and the horses behind him, and arrived at the farm long before any of the others. The squire was walking about there, looking and looking, for he was very curious to know what had happened. Finally, he caught sight of Hans coming along in this fashion, and was so frightened that he did not know what to do. But he shut the gate and put on the bar. When Hans reached the gate of the courtyard, he laid down the trees and hammered at it, but no one came to open it. He then took the trees and tossed them over the barn into the yard, and the cart after them, so that every wheel flew off in a different direction. When the squire saw this, he thought to himself, "The horses will come the same way if I don't open the door." So he did this. "Good day, master," said Hans, and put the horses into the stable and went into the kitchen to get something to eat. At length, the other men came home with their loads. When they came in, Hans said to them, "Do you remember the bargain we made last night? Which of you is it that's going to be hanged?" "Oh," said they, "that was only a joke. It didn't mean anything." "Oh well, it doesn't matter," said Hans, and there was no more about it. The squire, however, and his wife and the steward had much to say to each other about the terrible man they had got, and all were agreed that they must get rid of him in some way or other. The steward said that he would manage this all right. Next morning, they were to clean the well, and they would use of that opportunity. They would get him down into the well, and then have a big millstone ready to throw down on top of him. That would settle him. After that, they could just fill in the well, and then escape being at any expense for his funeral. Both the squire and his wife thought this a splendid idea, and went about rejoicing at the thought that now they would get rid of Hans. But Hans was hard to kill, as we shall see. He slept long next morning, as he always did, and finally, as he would not waken by himself, the squire had to go and call him. "Get up, Hans. You are sleeping too long," he cried. Hans woke up and rubbed his eyes. "That's so," said he. "I shall rise and have my breakfast." He got up then and dressed himself, while the breakfast stood waiting for him. When he had finished the whole of this, he asked what he was to do that day. He was told to help the other men to clean out the well. That was all right, and he went out and found the other men waiting for him. To these, he said that they could choose whichever task they liked, either to go down into the well and fill the buckets while he pulled them up, or pull them up, and he alone would go down to the bottom of the well. They answered that they would rather stay above ground, as there would be no room for so many of them down in the well. Hans therefore went down alone and began to clean out the well. But the men had arranged how they were to act, and immediately each of them seized a stone from a heap of huge blocks and threw them down above him, thinking to kill him with these. Hans, however, gave no more heed to this than to shout up to them, to keep the hens away from the well, for they were scraping gravel down on the top of him. They then saw that they could not kill him with little stones, but they had still the big one left. The whole 12 of them set to work with poles and rollers, and rolled the big millstone to the brink of the well. It was with the greatest difficulty that they got it thrown down there, and now they had no doubt that he had got all that he wanted. But the stone happened to fall so luckily that his head went right through the hole in the middle of the millstone, so that it sat round his neck like a priest's collar. At this, Hans would stay down no longer. He came out of the well with the millstone round his neck. Ad went straight to the squire and complained that the other men were trying to make a fool of him. He would not be their priest, he said. He had too little learning for that. Saying this, he bent down his head and shook the stone off so that it crushed one of the squire's big toes. The squire went limping into his wife, and the steward was sent for. He was told that he must devise some plan for for getting rid of this terrible person. The scheme he had devised before had been of no use, and now good counsel was scarce. "Oh no," said the steward. "There are good enough ways yet. The squire can send him this evening to fish in Devilmoss Lake. He will never escape alive from there, for no one can go there by night for old Eric." That was a grand idea, both the squire and his wife thought, and so he limped out again to Hans and said that he would punish his men for having tried to make a fool of him. Meanwhile, Hans could do a little job where he would be free from these rascals. He should go out on the lake and fish there that night, and would then be free from all work on the following day. "All right," said Hans. "I am well content with that, but I must have something with me to eat. A baking of bread, a cask of butter, a barrel of ale, and a keg of brandy. I can't do with less than that." The squire said that he could easily get all that, so Hans got all of these tied up together, hung them over his shoulder on his good staff, and tramped away to Devilmoss Lake. There, he got into the boat, rowed out upon the lake, and got everything ready to fish, as he now lay out there in the middle of the lake, and it was pretty late in the evening. He thought he would have something to eat first, before starting to work. Just as he was at his busiest with this, old Eric rose out of the lake, caught him by the cuff of the neck, whipped him out of the boat, and dragged him down to the bottom. It was a lucky thing that Hans had his walking stick with him that day, and had just time to catch hold of it when he felt old Eric's claws in his neck. So when they got down to the bottom, he said, "Stop now, just wait a little. Here is solid ground." With that, he caught old Eric by the back of the neck with one hand and hammered away on his back with the staff till he beat him out as flat as a pancake. Old Eric then began to lament and howl, begging him just to let him go, and he would never come back to the lake again. "No, my good fellow," said Hans. "You won't get off until you promise to bring all the fish in the lake up to the squire's courtyard before tomorrow morning." Old Eric eagerly promised this if Hans would only let him go. So Hans rowed ashore, ate up the rest of his provisions, and went home to bed. Next morning, when the squire rose and opened his front door, the fish came tumbling into the porch, and the whole yard was crammed full of them. He ran in again to his wife, for he could never devise anything himself, and said to her, "What shall we do with him now? Old Eric hasn't taken him. I am certain that all the fish are out of the lake, for the yard is just filled with them." "Yes, that's a bad business," said she. "You must see if you can't get him sent to purgatory to demand tribute." The squire therefore made his way to the men's quarters to speak to Hans, and it took him all his time to push his way along the walls, under the eaves, on account of the fish that filled the yard. He thanked Hans for having fished so well, and said that now he had an errand for him, which he could only give to a trusty servant, and that was to journey to purgatory and demand 3 years' tribute, which, he said, was owing to him from that quarter. "Willingly," said Hans, "but what road do I go to get there?" The squire stood and did not know what to say, and had first to go in to his wife to ask her. "Oh, what a fool you are," said she. "Can't you direct him straight forward, south through the wood? Whether he gets there or not, we shall be quit of him." Out goes the squire again to Hans. "The way lies straight forward, south through the wood," said he. Hans then must have his provisions for the journey: 2 bakings of bread, 2 casks of butter, 2 barrels of ale, and 2 kegs of brandy. He tied all these up together and got them on his shoulder, hanging on his good walking stick, and off he tramped southward. After he had got through the wood, there was more than one road, and he was in doubt which of them was the right one. So he sat down and opened up his bundle of provisions. He found he had left his knife at home, but by good chance there was a plough lying close at hand. So he took the coulter of this to cut the bread with. As he sat there and took his bite, a man came riding past him. "Where are you from?" said Hans. "From purgatory," said the man. "Then stop and wait a little," said Hans. But the man was in a hurry and would not stop. So Hans ran after him and caught the horse by the tail. This brought it down on its hind legs, and the man went flying over its head into a ditch. "Just wait a little," said Hans. "I am going the same way." He got his provisions tied up again and laid them on the horse's back. Then he took hold of the reins and said to the man, "We two can go along together on foot." As they went on their way, Hans told the stranger both about the errand he had on hand and the fun he had had with old Eric. The other said but little, but he was well acquainted with the way, and it was no long time before they arrived at the gate. There both horse and rider disappeared, and Hans was left alone outside. "They will come and let me in presently," he thought to himself, but no one came. He hammered at the gate. Still no one appeared. Then he got tired of waiting and smashed at the gate with his staff until he knocked it in pieces and got inside. A whole troop of little demons came down upon him and asked what he wanted. "His master's compliments," said Hans. And he wanted 3 years' tribute. At this they howled at him and were about to lay hold of him and drag him off. But when they had got some raps from his walking stick, they let go again, howled still louder than before, and ran in to old Eric, who was still in bed after his adventure in the lake. They told him that a messenger had come from the squire at Devilmoss to demand 3 years' tribute. He had knocked the gate to pieces and bruised their arms and legs with his iron staff. "Give him 3 years. Give him 10, shouted old Eric. "Only don't let him come near me." So all the little demons came dragging so much silver and gold that it was something awful. Hans filled his bundle with gold and silver coins, put it on his neck, and tramped back to his master, who was scared beyond all measure at seeing him again. But Hans was also tired of service now. Of all the gold and silver he brought with him, he let the squire keep 1/2, and he was glad enough, both for the money and at getting rid of Hans. The other half he took home to his father, the smith in Fir-Tree. To him also he said, "Farewell." He was now tired of living on shore among mortal men, and preferred to go home again to his mother. Since that time, no one has ever seen Hans, the mermaid's son. Peter Bull. There once lived in Denmark a peasant and his wife who owned a very good farm, but had no children. They often lamented to each other that they had no one of their own to inherit all the wealth that they possessed. They continued to prosper and became rich people, but there was no heir to it all. One year it happened that they owned a pretty little bull calf, which they called Peter. It was the prettiest little creature they had ever seen, so beautiful and so wise that it understood everything that was said to it, and so gentle and so full of play that both the man and his wife came to be as fond of it as if it had been their own child. One day, the man said to his wife, "I wonder now whether our parish clerk could teach Peter to talk. In that case, we could not do better than adopt him as our son and let him inherit all that we possess." "Well, I don't know," said his wife. "Our clerk is tremendously learned and knows much more than his paternoster, and I could almost believe that he might be able to teach Peter to talk. For Peter has a wonderfully good head, too. You might at least ask him about it." Off went the man to the clerk and asked him whether he thought he could teach a bull calf that they had to speak, for they wished so much to have it as their heir. The clerk was no fool. He looked round about to see that no one could overhear them, and said, "Oh, yes, I can easily do that, but you must not speak to anyone about it. It must be done in all secrecy, and the priest must not know of it. Otherwise, I shall get into trouble, as it is forbidden." It will also cost you something, as some very expensive books are required." That did not matter at all, the man said. They would not care so very much what it cost. The clerk could have $100 to begin with to buy the books. He also promised to tell no one about it, and to bring the calf round in the evening. He gave the clerk the $100 on the spot, and in the evening took the calf round to him. And the clerk promised to do his best with it. In a week's time, he came back to the clerk to hear about the calf and see how it was thriving. The clerk, however, said that he could not get a sight of it, for then Peter would long after him and forget all that he had already learned. He was getting on well with his learning, but another $100 were needed, as they must have more books. The peasant had the money with him, so he gave it to the clerk and went home again with high hopes. In another week, the man came again to learn what progress Peter had made now. "He is getting on very well," said the clerk. "I suppose he can't say anything yet," said the man. "Oh, yes," said the clerk. "He can say moo now." "Do you think he will get on with his learning?" asked the peasant. "Oh, yes," said the clerk. "But I shall want another $100 for books. Peter can't learn well out of the ones that he has got." "Well, well," said the man. "What must be spent shall be spent." So he gave the clerk the third $100 for books, and a cask of good old ale for Peter. The clerk drank the ale himself and gave the calf milk, which he thought would be better for it. Some weeks passed, during which the peasant did not come round to ask after the calf, being frightened lest it should cost him another $100, for he had begun to squirm a bit at having to part with so much money. Meanwhile, the clerk decided that the calf was as fat as it could be, so he killed it. After he had got all the beef out of the way, he went inside, put on his black clothes, and made his way to the peasant's house. As soon as he had said, "Good day," he asked, "Has Peter come home here?" "No, indeed, he hasn't," said the man. "Surely he hasn't run away?" "I hope," said the clerk, "that he would not behave so contemptibly after all the trouble I have had to teach him, and all that I have spent upon him. I have had to spend at least $100 of my own money to buy books for him before I got him so far on." He could say anything he liked now, so he said today that he longed to see his parents again. I was willing to give him that pleasure, but I was afraid that he wouldn't be able to find the way here by himself, so I made myself ready to go with him. When we had got outside the house, I remembered that I had left my stick inside, and went in again to get it. When I came out again, Peter had gone off on his own account. I thought he would be here, and if he isn't, I don't know where he is." The peasant and his wife began to lament bitterly that Peter had run away in this fashion, just when they were to have so much joy of him, and after they had spent so much on his education. The worst of it was that now they had no heir after all. The clerk comforted them as best he could. He also was greatly distressed that Peter should have behaved in such a way just when he should have gained honor from his pupil. Perhaps he had only gone astray, and he would advertise him at church next Sunday and find out where anyone had seen him. Then he bade them goodbye and went home and dined on a good fat veal roast. Now it so happened that the clerk took in a newspaper, and one day he chanced to read in its columns of a new merchant who had settled in a town at some distance, and whose name was Peter Bull. He put the newspaper in his pocket and went round to the sorrowing couple who had lost their heir. He read the paragraph to them and added, "I wonder now whether that could be your bull calf, Peter." "Yes, of course it is," said the man. "Who else would it be?" His wife then spoke up and said, "You must set out, good man, and see about him, for it is him, I am perfectly certain. Take a good sum of money with you too, for who knows but what he may want some cash now that he has turned a merchant." Next day, the man got a bag of money on his back, and a sandwich in his pocket, and his pipe in his mouth, and set out for the town where the new merchant lived. It was no short way, and he traveled for many days before he finally arrived there. He reached it one morning, just at daybreak, found out the right place, and asked if the merchant was at home. "Yes, he was," said the people, "but he was not up yet." "That doesn't matter," said the peasant, "for I am his father. Just show me up to his bedroom." Wow. He was shown up to the room, and as soon as he entered it, Ad caught sight of the merchant. He recognized him at once. He had the same broad forehead, the same thick neck, and same red hair. But in other respects, he was now like a human being. The peasant rushed straight up to him and took a firm hold of him. "Oh, Peter," said he, "what a sorrow you have caused us, both myself and your mother, by running off like this, just as we had got you well educated. Get up now, so that I can see you properly, and have a talk with you." The merchant thought that it was a lunatic who had made his way into him, and thought it best to take things quietly. "All right," said he. "I shall do so at once." He got out of bed and made haste to dress himself. "Aye," said the peasant, "now I can see how clever our clerk is. He has done well by you, for now you look just like a human being. If one didn't know it, one would never think that it was you we got from the red cow. Will you come home with me now?" "No," said the merchant. I can't find time just now. I have a big business to look after." "You could have the farm at once, you know," said the peasant, "and we old people would retire. But if you would rather stay in business, of course you may do so. Are you in want of anything?" "Oh, yes," said the merchant. "I want nothing so much as money." A merchant has always a use for that. "I can well believe that," said the peasant, "for you had nothing at all to start with. I have brought some with me for that very end." With that, he emptied his bag of money out upon the table so that it was all covered with bright dollars. When the merchant saw what kind of man he had before him, he began to speak him fair, and invited him to stay with him for some days, so that they might have some more talk together. "Very well," said the peasant, "but you must call me father." "I have neither father nor mother alive," said Peter Bull. "I know that," said the man. "Your real father was sold at Hamburg last Michaelmas, and your real mother died while calving in spring. But my wife and I have adopted you as our own, and you are our only heir, so you must call me Father." Peter Bull was quite willing to do so, and it was settled that he should keep the money, while the peasant made his will and left to him all that he had before he went home to his wife and told her the whole story. She was delighted to hear that it was true enough about Peter Bull, that he was no other than their own bull calf. "You must go at once and tell the clerk," said she, "and pay him the $100 of his own money that he spent upon our son. He has earned them well, and more besides, for all the joy he has given us in having such a son and heir." The man agreed with this, and thanked the clerk for all he had done, and gave him $200. Then he sold the farm, and removed with his wife to the town where their dear son and heir was living. To him they gave all their wealth, and lived with him till their dying day. Snowflake. Once upon a time, there lived a peasant called Ivan, and he had a wife whose name was Marie. They would have been quite happy, except for one thing. They had no children to play with, and as they were now old people, they did not find that watching the children of their neighbors at all made up to them for having one of their own. One winter, which nobody living will ever forget, the snow lay so deep that it came up to the knees of even the tallest man. When it had all fallen, and the sun was shining again, the children ran out into the street to play, and the old man and his wife sat at their window and gazed at them. The children first made a sort of little terrace and stamped it hard and firm, and then they began to make a snow woman. Ivan and Marie watched them, the while thinking about many things. Suddenly, Ivan's face brightened, and looking at his wife, he said, "Wife, why shouldn't we make a snow woman too?" "Why not?" replied Marie, who happened to be in a very good temper. "It might amuse us a little, but there is no use making a woman. Let us make a little snow child and pretend it is a living one." "Yes, let us do that," said Ivan, and he took down his cap and went into the garden with his old wife. Then the two set to work with all their might to make a doll out of the snow. They shaped a little body and 2 little hands and 2 little feet. On top of all, they placed a ball of snow, out of which the head was to be. "What in the world are you doing?" asked a passer-by. "Can't you guess?" returned Ivan. "Making a snow child," replied Marie. They had finished the nose and the chin. 2 holes were left for the eyes, and Ivan carefully shaped out the mouth. No sooner had he done so than he felt a warm breath upon his cheek. He started back in surprise and looked, and behold, the eyes of the child met his, and its lips, which were as red as raspberries, smiled at him. "What is it?" cried Ivan, crossing himself. "Am I mad, or is the thing bewitched?" The snow child bent its head as if it had been really alive. It moved its little arms and its little legs in the snow that lay about it, just as the living children did theirs. "Ah, Ivan, Ivan!" exclaimed Marie, trembling with joy. "Heaven has sent us a child at last." And she threw herself upon Snowflake, for that was the snow child's name, and covered her with kisses. And the loose snow fell away from Snowflake as an eggshell does from an egg. And it was a little girl whom Marie held in her arms. "Oh, my darling Snowflake," cried the old woman, and led her into the cottage. And Snowflake grew fast. Each hour as well as each day made a difference, and every day she became more and more beautiful. The old couple hardly knew how to contain themselves for joy, and thought of nothing else. The cottage was always full of village children, for they amused Snowflake, and there was nothing in the world they would not have done to amuse her. She was their doll, and they were continually inventing new dresses for her, and teaching her songs or playing with her. Nobody knew how clever she was. She noticed everything, and could learn a lesson in a moment. Anyone would have taken her for 13 at least. And besides all that, she was so good and obedient, and so pretty, too. Her skin was as white as snow, her eyes as blue as forget-me-nots, and her hair was long and golden. Only her cheeks had no color in them, but were as fair as her forehead. So the winter went on, till at last the spring sun mounted higher in the heavens and began to warm the earth. The grass grew green in the fields, and high in the air the larks were heard singing. The village girls met and danced in a ring, singing, beautiful spring, how came you here? How came you here? Did you come on a plow? Or was it a harrow? Only Snowflake sat quite still by the window of the cottage. "What is the matter, dear child?" asked Marie. "Why are you so sad? Are you ill? Or have they treated you unkindly?" "No," replied Snowflake. "It is nothing, Mother. No one has hurt me. I am well." The spring sun had chased away the last snow from its hiding place under the hedges. The fields were full of flowers. Nightingales sang in the trees, and all the world was gay. But the gayer grew the birds, and the flowers, the sadder became Snowflake. She hid herself from her playmates and curled herself up where the shadows were deepest, like a lily amongst its leaves. Her only pleasure was to lie amid the green willows near some sparkling stream. At the dawn and at twilight only she seemed happy. When a great storm broke and the earth was white with hail, she became bright and joyous as the snowflake of old. But when the clouds passed and the hail melted beneath the sun, Snowflake would burst into tears and weep as a sister would weep over her brother. The spring passed, and it was the eve of St. John, or Midsummer Day. This was the greatest holiday of the year, when the young girls met in the woods to dance and play. They went to fetch Snowflake and said to Marie, "Let her come and dance with us." But Marie was afraid. She could not tell why, only she could not bear the child to go. Snowflake did not wish to go either, but they had no excuse ready. So Marie kissed the girl and said, "Go, my Snowflake, and be happy with your friends. And you, dear children, be careful of her. You know she is the light of my eyes to me." "Oh, we will take care of her," cried the girls gaily. And they ran off to the woods. There they wore wreaths, gathered nosegays, and sang songs, some sad, some merry. And whatever they did, Snowflake did too. When the sun set, they lit a fire of dry grass and placed themselves in a row, Snowflake being the last of all. "Now, watch us," they said, "and run just as we do." And they all began to sing and to jump one after another across the fire. Suddenly, close behind them, they heard a sigh, then a groan. "Ah!" They turned hastily and looked at each other. There was nothing. They looked again. Where was Snowflake? She has hidden herself for fun, they thought, and searched for her everywhere. "Snowflake! Snowflake!" But there was no answer. Where can she be? Oh, she must have gone home. They returned to the village, but there was no Snowflake. For days after that, they sought her high and low. They examined every bush and every hedge, but there was no Snowflake. And long after everyone else had given up hope, Ivan and Marie would wander through the woods, crying, "Snowflake, my dove, come back, come back." And sometimes they thought they heard a call, but it was never the voice of Snowflake. And what had become of her? Had a fierce, wild beast seized her and dragged her into his lair in the forest? Had some bird carried her off across the wide blue sea? No. No beast had touched her. No bird had borne her away. With the first breath of flame that swept over her when she ran with her friends, Snowflake had melted away, and a little soft haze floating upwards was all that remained of her. I know what I have learned. There was once a man who had 3 daughters, and they were all married to trolls who lived underground. One day, the man thought that he would pay them a visit, and his wife gave him some dry bread to eat by the way. After he had walked some distance, he grew both tired and hungry. So he sat down on the east side of a mound and began to eat his dry bread. The mound then opened, and his youngest daughter came out of it and said, "Why, Father, why are you not coming in to see me?" "Oh," said he, "if I had known that you lived here and had seen any entrance, I would have come in." Then he entered the mound along with her. The troll came home soon after this, and his wife told him that her father was come, and asked him to go and buy some beef to make broth with. "We can get it easier than that," said the troll. He fixed an iron spike into one of the beams of the roof, and ran his head against this till he had knocked several large pieces off his head. He was just as well as ever after doing this, and they got their broth without further trouble. The troll then gave the old man a sackful of money, and laden with this, he betook himself homewards. When he came near his home, he remembered that he had a cow about to calve, so he laid down the money on the ground, ran home as fast as he could, and asked his wife whether the cow had calved yet. "What kind of a hurry is this to come home in?" said she. "No, the cow has not calved yet." "Then you must come out and help me in with a sackful of money," said the man. "A sackful of money?" cried his wife. "Yes, a sackful of money," said he. "Is that so very wonderful?" His wife did not believe very much what he told her, but she humored him and went out with him. When they came to the spot where he had left it, there was no money there. A thief had come along and stolen it. His wife then grew angry and scolded him heartily. "Well, well," said he, "hang the money. I know what I have learned." "What have you learned?" said she. "Ah, I know that," said the man. After some time had passed, the man had a mind to visit his second eldest daughter. His wife again gave him some dry bread to eat, and when he grew tired and hungry, he sat down on the east side of a mound and began to eat it. As he sat there, his daughter came up out of the mound and invited him to come inside, which he did very willingly. Soon after this, the troll came home. It was dark by that time, and his wife bade him go and buy some candles. "Oh, we shall soon get a light," said the troll. With that, he dipped his fingers into the fire, and they then gave light without being burned in the least. The old man got 2 sacks of money here and plodded away homewards with these. When he was very nearly home, he again thought of the cow that was with calf. So he laid down the money, ran home, and asked his wife whether the cow had calved yet. "Whatever is the matter with you?" said she. "You come hurrying as if the whole house was about to fall. You may set your mind at rest. The cow has not calved yet." The man now asked her to come and help him home with the 2 sacks of money. She did not believe him very much, but he continued to assure her that it was quite true, till at last she gave in and went with him. When they came to the spot, there had again been a thief there and taken the money. It was no wonder that the woman was angry about this, but the man only said, "Ah, if you only knew what I have learned." A third time, the man set out to visit his eldest daughter. When he came to a mound, he sat down on the east side of it and ate the dry bread which his wife had given him to take with him. The daughter then came out of the mound and invited her father to come inside. In a little, the troll came home, and his wife asked him to go and buy some fish. "We can get them much more easily than that," said the troll. "Give me your dough trough and your ladle." They seated themselves in the trough and rowed out on the lake, which was beside the mound. When they had got out a little way, the troll said to his wife, "Are my eyes green?" "No, not yet," said she. He rowed on a little further and asked again, "Are my eyes not green yet?" "Yes," said his wife, "they are green now." Then the troll sprang into the water and ladled up so many fish that in a short time the trough could hold no more. They then rowed home again and had a good meal off the fish. The old man now got 3 sacks full of money and set off home with them. When he was almost home, the cow again came into his head, and he laid down the money. This time, however, he took his wooden shoes and laid them above the money, thinking that no one would take it after that. Then he ran home and asked his wife whether the cow had calved. It had not, and she scolded him again for behaving in this way. But in the end, he persuaded her to go with him to help him with the 3 sacks of money. When they came to the spot, they found only the wooden shoes. for a thief had come along in the meantime and taken all the money. The woman was very angry and broke out upon her husband, but he took it all very quietly and only said, "Hang the money. I know what I have learned." "What have you learned, I should like to know?" said his wife. "You will see that yet," said the man. One day his wife took a fancy for broth and said to him, "Oh, go to the village and buy a piece of beef to make broth." "There's no need of that," said he. "We can get it an easier way." With that, he drove a spike into a beam and ran his head against it, and in consequence had to lie in bed for a long time afterwards. After he had recovered from this, his wife asked him one day to go and buy candles. As they had none, "No," he said, "there's no need for that." And he stuck his hand into the fire. This also made him take to bed for a good while. When he had got better again, his wife one day wanted fish and asked him to go and buy some. The man, however, wished again to show what he had learned, so he asked her to come along with him and bring her dough trough and a ladle. They both seated themselves in this and rowed upon the lake. When they had got out a little way, the man said, "Are my eyes green?" "No," said his wife. "Why should they be?" They rowed a little further out, and he asked again, "Are my eyes not green yet?" "What nonsense is this?" said she. "Why should they be green?" "Oh, my dear," said he, "can't you just say that they are green?" "Very well," said she, "they are green." As soon as he heard this, he sprang out into the water with the ladle for the fishes, but he just got leave to stay there with them. The Cunning Shoemaker. Once upon a time, there lived a shoemaker who could get no work to do, and was so poor that he and his wife nearly died of hunger. At last he said to her, "It is no use waiting on here. I can find nothing. So I shall go down to Mascalucia, and perhaps there I shall be more lucky." So down he went to Mascalucia and walked through the streets crying, "Who wants some shoes?" And very soon a window was pushed up, and a woman's head was thrust out of it. "Here are a pair for you to patch," she said. And he sat down on her doorstep and set about patching them. "How much do I owe you?" she asked when they were done. "A shilling." "Here is 18 pence, and good luck to you." And he went his way. He turned into the next street and set up his cry again. And it was not long before another window was pushed up, and another head appeared. "Here are some shoes for you to patch." And the shoemaker sat down on the doorstep and patched them. "How much do I owe you?" asked the woman when the shoes were finished. "A florin." "Here is a crown piece, and good luck to you." And she shut the window. "Well," thought the shoemaker. I have done finely. But I will not go back to my wife just yet, as if I only go on at this rate, I shall soon have enough money to buy a donkey. Having made up his mind what was best to do, he stayed in the town a few days longer, till he had 4 gold pieces safe in his purse. Then he went to the market, and for 2 of them he bought a good, strong donkey. And mounting on its back, he rode home to Catania. But as he entered a thick wood, he saw in the distance a band of robbers who were coming quickly towards him. I am lost, thought he. They are sure to take from me all the money that I have earned, and I shall be as poor as ever I was. What can I do? However, being a clever little man and full of spirit, he did not lose heart, but taking 5 florins, he fastened them out of sight under the donkey's thick mane. Then he rode on. Directly the robber came up to him, they seized him exactly as he had foretold, and took away all his money. "Oh, dear friends," he cried, wringing his hands, "I am only a poor shoemaker, and have nothing but this donkey left in the world." As he spoke, the donkey gave himself a shake, and down fell the 5 florins. "Where did that come from?" asked the robbers. "Ah," replied the shoemaker, "you have guessed my secret. The donkey is a golden donkey, and supplies me with all my money." "Sell him to us," said the robbers. "We will give you any price you like." The shoemaker at first declared that nothing would induce him to sell him, but at last he agreed to hand him over to the robbers for 50 gold pieces. "But listen to what I tell you," said he. "You must each take it in turn to own him for a night and a day, or else you will all be fighting over the money." With these words, they parted, the robbers driving the donkey to their cave in the forest, and the shoemaker returning home, very pleased with the success of his trick. He just stopped on the way to pick up a good dinner, and the next day spent most of his gains in buying a small vineyard. Meanwhile, the robbers had arrived at the cave where they lived, and the captain, calling them all round him, announced that it as his right to have the donkey for the first night. His companions agreed, and then he told his wife to put a mattress in the stable. She asked if he had gone out of his mind, but he answered crossly, "What is that to you? Do as you are bid, and tomorrow I will bring you some treasures." Very early, the captain awoke and searched the stable, but could find nothing, and guessed that Master Joseph had been making fun of them. "Well," he said to himself, "if I have been taken in, the others shall not come off any better." So, when one of his men arrived and asked him eagerly how much money he had got, he answered gaily, "Oh, comrade, if you only knew. But I shall say nothing about it till everyone has had his turn." One after another, they all took the donkey. but no money was forthcoming for anybody. At length, when all the band had been tricked, they held a council and resolved to march to the shoemaker's house and punish him well for his cunning. Just as before, the shoemaker saw them a long way off and began to think how he could outwit them again. When he had hit upon a plan, he called his wife and said to her, "Take a bladder and fill it with blood and bind it round your neck. When the robbers come and demand the money they gave me for the donkey, I shall shout to you and tell you to get it quickly. You must argue with me and decline to obey me, and then I shall plunge my knife into the bladder, and you must fall to the ground as if you were dead. There you must lie till I play on my guitar. Then get up and begin to dance." The wife made haste to do as she was bid, and there was no time to lose, for the robbers were drawing very near the house. They entered with a great noise and overwhelmed the shoemaker with reproaches for having deceived them about the donkey. "The poor beast must have lost its power, owing to the change of masters," said he. "But we will not quarrel about it. You shall have back the 50 gold pieces that you gave for him." "Aite," he cried to his wife, "go quickly to the chest upstairs and bring down the money for these gentlemen." "Wait a little," answered she. "I must first bake this fish. It will be spoiled if I leave it now." "Go this instant, as you are bid," shouted the shoemaker, stamping as if he was in a great passion. But as she did not stir, he drew his knife and stabbed her in the neck. The blood spurted out freely, and she fell to the ground as if she was dead. "What have you done?" asked the robbers, looking at him in dismay. The poor woman was doing nothing. "Perhaps I was hasty, but it is easily set right," replied the shoemaker, taking down his guitar and beginning to play. Hardly had he struck the first notes than his wife sat up, then got on her feet and danced. The robbers stared with open mouths, and at last they said, "Master Joseph, you may keep the 50 gold pieces, but tell us what you will take for your guitar, for you must sell it to us." "Oh, that is impossible," replied the shoemaker. "For every time I have a quarrel with my wife, I just strike her dead, and so give foot to my anger. This has become such a habit with me that I don't think I could break myself of it. And of course, if I got rid of the guitar, I could never bring her back to life again." However, the robbers would not listen to him, and at last he consented to take 40 gold pieces for the guitar. Then they all returned to their cave in the forest, delighted with their new purchase and longing for a chance of trying its powers. But the captain declared that the first trial belonged to him, and after that, the others might have their turn. That evening, he called to his wife and said, "What have you got for supper?" "Macaroni," answered she. "Why have you not boiled a fish?" he cried, and stabbed her in the neck so that she fell dead. The captain, who was not in the least angry, seized the guitar and began to play. But let him play as loud as he would, the dead woman never stirred. "O lying shoemaker! O abominable knave! Twice has he got the better of me, but I will pay him out." So he raged and swore, but it did him no good. The fact remained that he had killed his wife and could not bring her back again. The next morning came one of the robbers to fetch the guitar and to hear what had happened. "Well, how have you got on?" "Oh, splendidly. I stabbed my wife and then began to play, and now she is as well as ever." "Did you really? Then this evening I will try for myself." Of course, the same thing happened over again, till all the wives had been killed secretly. And when there were no more left, they whispered to each other the dreadful tale, and swore to be avenged on the shoemaker. The band lost no time in setting out for his house, and as before, the shoemaker saw them coming from afar. He called to his wife, who was washing in the kitchen. "Listen, Eta, when the robbers come and ask for me, say I have gone to the vineyard. Then tell the dog to call me and chase him from the house." When he had given these directions, he ran out of the back door and hid behind a barrel. A few minutes later, the robbers arrived and called loudly for the shoemaker. "Alas, good gentleman, he is up in the vineyard, but I will send the dog after him at once. Here, now quickly to the vineyard, and tell your master some gentlemen are here who wish to speak to him. Go as fast as you can." And she opened the door and let the dog out. "You can really trust the dog to call your husband?" asked the robbers. "Dear me, yes, he understands everything, and will always carry any message I give him." By and by, the shoemaker came in and said, "Good morning, gentlemen. The dog tells me you wish to speak to me." "Yes, we do," replied the robber. "We have come to speak to you about that guitar. It is your fault that we have murdered all our wives, and though we played as you told us, none of them ever came back to life. You could not have played properly," said the shoemaker. "It was your own fault." "Well, we will forget all about it," answered the robbers, "if you will only sell us your dog." "Oh, that is impossible. I should never get on without him." But the robbers offered him 40 gold pieces, and at last he agreed to let them have the dog. So they departed, taking the dog with them. And when they got back to their cave, the captain declared that it was his right to have the first trial. He then called his daughter and said to her, "I am going to the inn. If anybody wants me, loose the dog and send him to call me." About an hour after someone arrived on business, and the girl untied the dog and said, "Go to the inn and call my father." The dog bounded off, but ran straight to the shoemaker. When the robber got home and found no dog, he thought he must have gone back to his old master, and though night had already fallen, he went off after him. "Master Joseph, is the dog here?" asked he. "Ah, yes. The poor beast is so fond of me. You must give him time to get accustomed to new ways." So the captain brought the dog back, and the following morning handed him over to another of the band, just saying that the animal really could do what the shoemaker had said. The second robber carefully kept his own counsel and fetched the dog secretly back from the shoemaker, and so on through the whole band. At length, when everybody had suffered, they met and told the whole story. And next day, they all marched off in fury to the man who had made game of them. After reproaching him with having deceived them, they tied him up in a sack and told him they were going to throw him into the sea. The shoemaker lay quite still and let them do as they would. They went on till they came to a church, and the robbers said, "The sun is hot and the sack is heavy. Let us leave it here and go in and rest." So they put the sack down by the roadside and went into the church. Now, on a hill nearby, there was a swineherd looking after a great herd of pigs and whistling merrily. When Master Joseph heard him, he cried out as loud as he could, "I won't! I won't, I say." "What won't you do?" asked the swineherd. "Oh," replied the shoemaker, "they want me to marry the king's daughter, and I won't do it." "How lucky you are," sighed the swineherd. "Now, if it were only me." "Oh, if that's all," replied the cunning shoemaker, "get you into this sack and let me out." Then the swineherd opened the sack and took the place of the shoemaker, who went gaily off, driving the pigs before him. When the robbers were rested, they came out of the church, took up the sack, and carried it to the sea, where they threw it in, and it sank directly. As they came back, they met the shoemaker and stared at him with open mouths. "Oh, if you only knew how many pigs live in the sea," he cried. "And the deeper you go, the more there are. I have just brought up these and mean to return for some more." "There are still some left there?" "Oh, more than I could count," replied the shoemaker. "I will show you what you must do." Then he led the robbers back to the shore. "Now," said he, "you must each of you tie a stone to your necks, so that you may be sure to go deep enough, for I found the pigs that you saw very deep down indeed." Then the robbers all tied stones round their necks and jumped in and were drowned, and Master Joseph drove his pigs home, and was a rich man to the end of his days. The King Who Would Have a Beautiful Wife. 50 years ago, there lived a king who was very anxious to get married. But as he was quite determined that his wife should be as beautiful as the sun, the thing was not so easy as it seemed, for no maiden came up to his standard. Then he commanded a trusty servant to search through the length and breadth of the land till he found a girl fair enough to be queen. And if he had the good luck to discover one, he was to bring her back with him. The servant set out at once on his journey, and sought high and low in castles and cottages. But though pretty maidens were plentiful as blackberries, he felt sure that none of them would please the king. One day, he had wandered far and wide, and was feeling very tired and thirsty. By the roadside stood a tiny little house, and here he knocked and asked for a cup of water. Now in this house dwelt 2 sisters, and one was 80, and the other 90 years old. They were very poor, and earned their living by spinning. This had kept their hands very soft and white, like the hands of a girl. And when the water was passed through the lattice, and the servant saw the small, delicate fingers, he said to himself, "A maiden must indeed be lovely if she has a hand like that." And he made haste back and told the king. "Go back at once," said his majesty, "and try to get a sight of her." The faithful servant departed on his errand without losing any time, and again he knocked at the door of the little house and begged for some water. As before, the old woman did not open the door, but passed the water through the lattice. "Do you live here alone?" asked the man. "No," replied she. "My sister lives with me. We are poor girls and have to work for our bread." "How old are you?" "I am 15, and she is 20. Then the servant went back to the king and told him all he knew. And his majesty answered, "I will have the 15-year-old one. Go and bring her here." The servant returned a 3rd time to the little house and knocked at the door. In reply to his knock, the lattice window was pushed open, and a voice inquired what it was he wanted. "The king has desired me to bring back the youngest of you to become his queen," he replied. "Tell his majesty I am ready to do his bidding. But since my birth, no ray of light has fallen upon my face. If it should ever do so, I shall instantly grow black. Therefore beg, I pray you, his most gracious majesty, to send this evening a shut carriage, and I will return in it to the castle." When the king heard this, he ordered his great golden carriage to be prepared, and in it to be placed some magnificent robes, and the old woman wrapped herself in a thick veil and was driven to the castle. The king was eagerly awaiting her, and when she arrived, he begged her politely to raise her veil and let him see her face. But she answered, "Here the tapers are too bright, and the light too strong. Would you have me turn black under your very eyes?" And the king believed her words, and the marriage took place without the veil being once lifted. Afterwards, when they were alone, he raised the corner and knew for the first time that he had wedded a wrinkled old woman. And, in a furious burst of anger, he dashed open the window and flung her out. But, luckily for her, her clothes caught on a nail in the wall and kept her hanging between heaven and earth. While she was thus suspended, expecting every moment to be dashed to the ground, 4 fairies happened to pass by. "Look, sisters," cried one, "surely that is the old woman that the king sent for. Shall we wish that her clothes may give way, and that she should be dashed to the ground?" "Oh, no, no," exclaimed another. "Let us wish her something good. I myself will wish her youth, and I beauty, and I wisdom, and I a tender heart." So spake the fairies, and went their way, leaving the most beautiful maiden in the world behind them. The next morning, when the king looked from his window, he saw this lovely creature hanging on the nail. "Ah, what have I done? Surely I must have been blind last night." And he ordered long ladders to be brought and the maiden to be rescued. Then he fell on his knees before her and prayed her to forgive him, and a great feast was made in her honor. Some days after came the 90-year-old sister to the palace and asked for the queen. "Who is that hideous old witch?" said the king. "Oh, an old neighbor of mine, who is half silly," she replied. But the old woman looked at her steadily and knew her again, and said, "How have you managed to grow so young and beautiful? I should like to be young and beautiful too." This question she repeated the whole day long, till at length the queen lost patience and said, "I had my old head cut off, and this new head grew in its place." Then the old woman went to a barber and spoke to him, saying, "I will give you all you ask if you will only cut off my head, so that I may become young and lovely. But, my good woman, if I do that, you will die." But the old woman would listen to nothing, and at last the barber took out his knife and struck the first blow at her neck. "Ah!" she shrieked as she felt the pain. "Il faut souffrir pour être belle," said the barber, who had been in France. And at the second blow, her head rolled off, and the old woman was dead for good and all.